The wedding invitation arrived at Madame Kang's estate on a silver tray, carried by a housekeeper whose hands trembled slightly as she placed it before the woman who controlled half the wealth and soul from behind a silk curtain. The envelope was black with silver lettering. Elegant. Modern. Completely devoid of tradition. Madame Kang opened it with a letter knife that had belonged to her late husband, read the contents once, and then did something that made the housekeeper take a full step backward. She smiled. The invitation announced the marriage of Kang Jae-sun and Olivia Carter. Not Lauren Carter. Her real name, printed in bold, defiant letters. A statement. A declaration. A dare. Madame Kang set the invitation down beside her tea and picked up her phone. She had been patient for 3 weeks. Patience was not passivity. Patience was preparation. And Madame Kang had been preparing for this moment since the night her son knelt on a rooftop and offered a black diamond to a woman who had no bloodline, no family name, no dynasty behind her. A woman who had entered her son's world as a spy and somehow convinced him that love was more important than legacy. That delusion ended today. She dialed a number. The voice that answered belonged to Prosecutor General Shin Yunji, a woman who owed her career, her reputation, and several carefully buried secrets to the Kang family. "The file I sent you last week," Madame Kang said. "Have you reviewed it?" "I have. It's compelling. But I need to be careful, Madame Kang. Your son is not an ordinary target. If this goes wrong, it won't go wrong. I have spent 30 years building systems that don't fail. You will issue the warrant. You will time it precisely. And you will ensure that when the world sees what my son did 3 years ago, there is no ambiguity. No room for self-defense. No room for doubt. And the woman? Carter? Leave her to me. I have something special planned for the detective who thinks she can marry into my family." She ended the call and looked out the window at the perfectly manicured gardens that stretched toward the horizon. Every tree had been planted according to her design. Every stone had been placed where she directed. Every petal bloomed because she allowed it. Her son would learn that some things could not be replanted in foreign soil. And Olivia Carter would learn that the most dangerous creature in Korea was not the man she had fallen in love with. It was the woman who had made him. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell right now, because what Madame Kang has set in motion is going to shake this story to its foundation. Trust me, you are not ready. 3 weeks had passed since the proposal, and Olivia had begun to believe, against every instinct she possessed, that the worst was behind them. The gallery was thriving. The transition of Jason's business operations toward legitimacy was progressing faster than anyone had expected. Yoontaek had stepped into Miho's former role with quiet competence, and the organization was stabilizing. And Jason was happy. Genuinely, visibly, almost painfully happy in a way that made the people around him uneasy because they had never seen it before and didn't know what to do with it. He showed up at her gallery unannounced on a Thursday afternoon carrying 2 cups of coffee and a bag of hotteok from the street vendor she loved near Namsan. He walked in, set the food on her desk, kissed her like they hadn't seen each other in weeks instead of hours, and then stood back to examine the new piece she was hanging. "It's crooked," he said. "It's not crooked. The left side is 3 millimeters lower than the right." "And how would you know that?" "Because I am a man who has spent his entire adult life noticing details that other people miss. It's how I've stayed alive." He took a sip of his coffee. "Also, I have a level on my phone." She threw a packing peanut at his head. He caught it without looking. "You're insufferable," she said. "You agreed to marry me." "I'm reconsidering." "No, you're not." "No, I'm not." He crossed the room and stood behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. She leaned back into him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest against her back, and for a moment the world was nothing but this. 2 people. A crooked painting. Coffee getting cold on a desk. "Have you thought about the ceremony?" he asked. "I've thought about it." "And?" "Small. Intimate. The rooftop garden at the gallery. The one you redesigned. The one where I proposed. That one." Who would you invite? She was quiet for a moment. My mother. She's been asking to come to Seoul since I told her. My sister Naomi. A few friends from the States. She paused. Captain Harris. Jason's arms tightened slightly around her. The man who sent you to spy on me. The man who gave me the assignment that led me to you. I wouldn't be here without him. He made a low, begrudging sound. Fine. Harris can come. But I refuse to thank him. She laughed. What about your side? Take. A few people from the organization who have earned it. My mother. He stopped. Olivia turned in his arms to face him. The shift in his expression was immediate. The happiness pulled back like a tide revealing rocks. Have you spoken to her? Olivia asked. Not since the confrontation. She calls. I don't answer. His jaw tightened. She sent a gift to the penthouse last week. A painting. One my father loved. She knows exactly what she's doing. Every gesture is calculated. Maybe she's trying to make peace. My mother doesn't make peace. She makes positioning moves. That painting was a reminder. This is your father's legacy. Don't forget where you come from. He shook his head. She initiated a police investigation against her own son, Olivia. She set in motion the chain of events that led to David Yu's death. She has manipulated every person in my life since I was old enough to be useful. Peace is not in her vocabulary. She's still your mother. That makes it worse, not better. Olivia touched his face. You don't have to invite her. But whatever she's planning, and I know she's planning something because Yuna warned me, we face it head on. No hiding. No pretending. Together, he said. Together. He kissed her forehead and held her close, and neither of them knew that the first move had already been made. It arrived the following Monday in the form of a phone call from a number Olivia didn't recognize. She answered while unpacking a shipment of sculptures at the gallery. Ms. Carter? The voice was female, professional, and cold. This is the office of the Prosecutor General. You are being asked to present yourself for formal questioning regarding your involvement in the obstruction of an active criminal investigation, unauthorized destruction of classified evidence, and the aiding and abetting of organized criminal activity during your tenure as a detective with the International Crimes Division. Olivia's hand froze on the sculpture she was unwrapping. On what grounds? The details will be provided upon your arrival. You are expected at the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's office tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Failure to appear will result in a warrant. The line went dead. Olivia stood motionless in her gallery, the phone pressed against her ear, listening to silence. Then she called Jason. He answered on the first ring. He always did. What's wrong? How do you know something is wrong? Because I can hear it in the way you breathe. Talk to me. She told him. The prosecutor's call. The charges. The timing. The silence on his end lasted exactly 4 seconds. When he spoke, his voice had shifted into the register she recognized from the night on the rooftop. Cold. Calculated. The voice of a man who had been running an empire since he was 19 years old. This is her, he said. My mother. Prosecutor General Shin Yunji has been in my mother's pocket for over a decade. This is her opening move. What do I do? You show up tomorrow. You say nothing without a lawyer present. I'm sending you the best defense attorney in Korea. His name is Park Jung-go. He's handled cases for me, for the government, and for 3 foreign embassies. He will be at your apartment by 7 in the morning. Jae-sun. I'm not a criminal. I know that. You know that. But my mother has spent 30 years turning truth into whatever shape serves her purposes. She's not trying to put you in prison. She's trying to put you in a position where you feel powerless. Where you run. I don't run. I know. That's what terrifies her. Olivia went to the prosecutor's office the next morning in a white blouse and black trousers, her locks pulled back, her face composed. Park Jung-go walked beside her, a slight man with wire-rimmed glasses and the calm demeanor of someone who had stared down judges and generals without blinking. The questioning lasted 4 hours. Prosecutor Shin sat across from Olivia with the focused intensity of a surgeon, asking questions designed to find cracks. Had Olivia deleted evidence during her undercover assignment? Had she knowingly allowed criminal activity to continue after becoming romantically involved with her target? Had she shared classified information with Kang Jae-sun? Had she compromised ongoing investigations? Olivia answered each question with precision, guided by Jung-go's steady counsel. She had not deleted evidence. She had not shared classified information. Her resignation had been voluntary and accepted by her commanding officer. Every action she had taken during the investigation was documented and authorized. But then Prosecutor Shin placed a photograph on the table. It was a still image from a security camera. Olivia in Jason's penthouse study at 3 a.m, photographing documents from his safe. The timestamp was clear. The image was damning. This image shows you accessing classified materials from a criminal organization's records, Shin said. Materials that you subsequently transmitted to your handlers. Standard procedure for an undercover operation. But what interests me, Ms. Carter, is what happened to those materials after your cover was blown. She placed a second photograph on the table. Then a third. Then a fourth. Each one showed a different document that Olivia had photographed during her assignment. Documents that Olivia knew were fake, planted by Yoon-taek under Jason's orders. These documents were submitted to the task force as evidence, Shin continued. They were subsequently analyzed and found to contain fabricated information. The question is, did you know they were fabricated? And if so, did you knowingly submit false evidence to a law enforcement investigation? Park Jung-go leaned forward. My client was an undercover operative performing her duties. She had no way of knowing the documents she photographed had been altered by the target of the investigation. Perhaps. But the timeline is interesting. These documents were photographed after Ms. Carter had already begun a sexual relationship with Kang Jae-sun. After she had already been emotionally compromised. One could argue that by remaining in the operation after her objectivity was lost, she contributed to the corruption of the investigation itself. Olivia's hands were steady on the table. But inside, she felt the walls closing in. Madame Kang had thought of everything. She wasn't trying to prove a crime. She was trying to create a narrative. Detective falls for target. Detective becomes compromised. Investigation is corrupted. Evidence is tainted. And at the center of it all, a black woman who had no business being in this world and who had brought destruction wherever she went. It was a story designed to ruin her credibility, destroy any future career, and create enough legal pressure to make her leave Korea. Leave Jae-sun. We're done here, Jung-go said, standing. My client has cooperated fully. Any further questions can be submitted in writing. They left. In the elevator, Olivia leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. How bad is it? She asked. Jung-go adjusted his glasses. The evidence they have is circumstantial. They can't prove you knew the documents were fake. They can't prove you intentionally corrupted the investigation. But they don't need to prove anything in court, Ms. Carter. They just need to create enough noise. Enough doubt. Enough pressure. Pressure to do what? To make you leave. That evening, Olivia told Jae-sun everything. They sat in the penthouse, the city sprawled beneath them, and she watched his face as she described each question, each photograph, each carefully laid trap. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he stood and walked to the window, pressing both hands flat against the glass as if he were trying to hold up the sky. She's using the prosecutor to build a case against you, he said slowly. Not to convict you. To control you. To make your life in Korea impossible. To isolate you from me. It's working, Olivia said quietly. Not the isolation. But the pressure. I can feel it. He turned to face her. What do you need? I need the truth, Jae-sun. All of it. Your mother told Prosecutor Shin things she couldn't know unless she had access to files that should be sealed. She knew about the photographs I took. She knew about the safe. She knew the timeline of our relationship down to the week. Someone gave her that information. Jason's expression darkened. Fontaine. Fontaine is in custody. Then someone else. Someone inside Harris's operation. He paused, and something cold settled over his features. Or someone inside mine. You think there's another leak? I think my mother has spent 3 decades building a network of obligations and debts that reaches into every institution in this country. Police. Prosecutors. Government. Military. There is no wall she cannot find a door through. He crossed the room and took her hands. But I will find the source. And I will cut it off. And your mother? What do we do about her? I handle her. We handle her. Together. That was the deal. He looked at her, and the conflict in his eyes was visceral. He wanted to protect her. He wanted to fight this battle alone, to shield her from the woman who had shaped him into a weapon and was now trying to use that weapon against the person he loved most. But Olivia Carter had never needed shielding. He knew that. It was the reason he loved her. It was the reason she terrified him. Together, he agreed. But Olivia, you need to understand something about my mother. She doesn't fight wars. She designs them. Every move she makes is 3 moves ahead. She is the most intelligent, most ruthless, most patient person I have ever known. And the thing that makes her truly dangerous is that she genuinely believes she's doing this out of love. Love for you. Love for the empire. For the name. For everything my father built and everything she has maintained. In her mind, I am not her son. I am her creation. And she cannot accept that her creation has chosen something she did not design. Someone, Olivia corrected. He chose someone. Jason pulled her close. The most extraordinary someone in the world. She pressed her face against his chest and breathed him in. We're going to survive this. I know. How do you know? Because you taught me something I spent my whole life not believing. What? That the people who love you are stronger than the people who own you. She held him tighter. And in the silence of the penthouse, high above a city that had tried to break them in every conceivable way, they held each other like the world was ending. Because in many ways, it was. The world as they knew it. The world of secrets and safety and pretending that the storm had passed. The storm hadn't passed. It had just been gathering strength. The second blow landed 4 days later. It was aimed not at Olivia, but at Jason. Yuntaek arrived at the penthouse at 6 in the morning, which was unusual enough that Olivia was immediately on alert. Taek's face was the color of old paper. We have a problem, Taek said, not bothering with greetings. Jason emerged from the bedroom in a t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair still damp from the shower. The domesticity of the image clashed violently with the tension radiating off his closest advisor. Talk, Jason said. Prosecutor Shin's office issued a new investigation order this morning. Not against Olivia. Against you. The charge is murder. The word hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. David Yu, Jason said. Taek nodded. But it's not the file we know about. It's not the version of events we've controlled. Your mother has provided the prosecutor with material we have never seen. A video. Olivia watched the blood drain from Jason's face. It happened slowly, like color leaking from a photograph left in the sun. What video? Jason whispered. Security footage from the warehouse. The night you died. We swept that warehouse, boss. We destroyed every camera. There should be no recording. Show me. Taek produced a tablet. His hands were steady, the way they always were in crisis, but his eyes betrayed the fear underneath. He pressed play. The footage was grainy but clear enough. The warehouse interior. Stacked crates. Dim lighting. 2 figures in the center of the frame. Kang Jae-sun and David Yu. They were talking. Arguing. Yu's body language was defensive, cornered. Then there was movement. Yu reaching for something. Jae-sun reacting. But the camera angle was wrong. From this perspective, it didn't look like you drew first. It looked like Jae-sun lunged forward. It looked like aggression, not defense. The fatal moment was obscured by a crate, and what the camera captured was Jae-sun standing over Yu's body, breathing hard, a weapon in his hand. Olivia watched it twice. Her detective's mind, never truly dormant, was already dissecting. The angle is deliberate, she said. Whoever positioned this camera knew exactly what it would capture and what it would obscure. The moment Yu draws his weapon is hidden behind the crate. All you see is the aftermath. Exactly, Take said. This isn't surveillance footage that was accidentally preserved. This was engineered. Jae-sun sat down heavily on the couch. My mother had a camera in that warehouse. She knew about the confrontation before it happened. She knew Miho had turned you. She knew I would go to that warehouse. His voice was hollow. She let it happen. She wanted it to happen. Why? Olivia asked, though the answer was already forming in her mind like a dark shape rising from deep water. Control, Jae-sun said. She wanted this footage as insurance. As a leash. As long as she had video of me killing a police officer, she had absolute control over me. I could never leave. I could never defy her. I could never be anything other than what she designed. And now that you've defied her, Olivia said. Now that you've chosen to go legitimate, chosen me, chosen a different life, she's using it. She'll give it to the prosecutor. They'll issue an arrest warrant. And the video, from that angle, without the full context, looks like murder. Jae-sun looked up at her. She's going to put me in prison, Olivia. My own mother is going to put me in prison. The room went silent. The magnitude of it settled over all three of them like a physical weight. Olivia knelt in front of Jae-sun and took his face in her hands. Listen to me. That video is incomplete. The angle is manipulated. There has to be a way to prove that you drew first. How? The only witnesses were me, you, and two of my men who are bound by loyalty, not law. No prosecutor will accept their testimony. Then we find the truth another way. If your mother planted a camera, she may have planted more than one. There may be additional footage that shows the full picture. Footage she kept because she's Madame Kong and she never destroys anything that might be useful. Take nodded slowly. If there's another angle, another recording, it would be in her personal archive. She keeps everything. Physical copies. Locked vaults. She's old school. Then we get it, Olivia said. We go into her estate and we find it. You're suggesting we rob my mother, Jae-sun said. I'm suggesting we retrieve evidence that proves your innocence from a woman who is using its absence to frame you for murder. There's a difference. A subtle one. I'm a subtle person. Despite everything, the ghost of a smile crossed his face. You're the least subtle person I've ever met. And yet you proposed to me. He caught her hand and pressed his lips against her knuckles. Yes. I did. If you are loving this story right now, drop a comment and tell me what you think Olivia and Jae-sun should do. Should they confront Madame Kong head-on, or play her game? Smash that like button and let's keep going because it's about to get even more intense. The plan took shape over 3 days of careful preparation. Olivia, Jae-sun, and Take worked together in the penthouse, blueprints of the Kong estate spread across the dining table, photographs of entry points taped to the windows, security rotation schedules compiled from Take sources inside the household staff. Your mother's personal archive is in the East Wing, Take said. Sublevel. Climate controlled. 2 combination locks, 1 biometric scanner, and a rotation of 2 guards. I know the combinations, Jae-sun said. She changed them every month when I was growing up, but the pattern is based on dates that were significant to my father. She's sentimental about exactly one person who ever lived, and he's been dead for 14 years. And the biometric? Fingerprint. Hers. Olivia raised an eyebrow. You have your mother's fingerprint? Jae-sun reached into a drawer and pulled out the invitation Madame Kong had sent in response to the wedding announcement. A single card, handwritten, with nothing but a date and a question mark. He held it up. She pressed this with her right index finger. Habit. She seals every personal correspondence with a thumbprint in the lower right corner. She has done it since I was a child. Take stared at him. You've been planning for this. I've been preparing for this since I was old enough to understand that my mother's love comes with conditions, and that one day, those conditions would require me to choose between her world and my own. He looked at Olivia. I made my choice. They went on a Friday night. Madame Kong was attending a charity gala at the Shilla Hotel, an event she hosted annually, which meant she would be occupied for at least 4 hours. Take handled the security rotation. Jason handled the locks. Olivia handled everything else. They entered through a service entrance on the north side of the estate. The grounds were extensive, old money traditional architecture blended with modern security infrastructure. Cameras. Motion sensors. A staff of 20. Olivia moved through the corridors with the training that 12 years of law enforcement had engraved into her nervous system. She cleared corners instinctively. Tracked guard movements by counting footsteps. Communicated with Jason and Take through earpieces using a system of taps and whispers that they had rehearsed until it was second nature. They reached the archive in 17 minutes. The sublevel was cool, dry, and eerily quiet. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls. Climate-controlled cases held documents, photographs, and recordings that spanned 3 decades of Kong family operations. She has everything down here, Take murmured, scanning the labels. Financial records going back to the 90s. Government correspondence. Police files. This is the real history of the Kong organization. Focus, Olivia said. We're here for the David Yu file. Everything else stays. They found it in the 4th cabinet. A thick folder labeled with a date and a single character that Jason translated as resolved. Inside were documents, photographs, and 2 USB drives. Jason opened the folder and went still. The first page was a memo. Handwritten. His mother's handwriting. It detailed, in precise, clinical language, the discovery that Huang Miho had identified undercover agent David Yu. It described the decision not to intervene. Not to warn Jason. Not to extract you. It described the calculation that allowing the confrontation to occur would produce leverage that could be used, indefinitely. It described the placement of 2 cameras in the warehouse. 2. Not 1. 2 different angles. She filmed it from both sides, Olivia said, reading over his shoulder. She has the angle that shows you drawing first. Jason's hand was shaking. Not with fear. With rage so profound it seemed to vibrate the air around him. He picked up the second USB drive. This is it. The full footage. Both angles. Take it, Olivia said. Take everything. Wait. Take's voice was sharp. He was looking at a second folder in the same cabinet. This one was labeled with Olivia's name. Olivia went cold. She opened it. Inside was a dossier that was more thorough than anything Captain Harris had ever compiled. Olivia's entire life. Her childhood in Atlanta. Her mother's name, address, medical history. Her sister Naomi's workplace, apartment, daily routine. Photographs of Olivia's niece and nephew at their school. Grades. Schedules. Everything. It was not intelligence. It was a threat. A meticulous, organized, devastating threat that said, I know where everyone you love is. I can reach them whenever I want. Olivia closed the folder. Her hands were steady, but something ancient and fierce had ignited behind her eyes. Something that went deeper than police training or combat skills or the calculated composure she had spent years perfecting. This was the fury of a woman whose family had been threatened by someone who believed that money and power made them untouchable. She targeted my family, Olivia said, and her voice was quiet in a way that made both Jason and Take look at her with something close to alarm. Olivia. My mother. My sister. My niece. My nephew. Children, Jason. She compiled surveillance on children. Jason reached for her. She pulled away. Not from him. From the comfort he was offering. Because comfort would soften the edge she needed right now, and she needed that edge sharp enough to cut through everything that was coming. "We take this to Harris," she said. "All of it. The David U footage. The memo proving she engineered the confrontation. And the dossier on my family. We take it to the police, to the prosecutor, to every institution your mother thinks she controls, and we burn her leverage to the ground. If we expose her, we expose the family," Jason said. "Everything my father built. Everything I've spent my life maintaining. It all comes out." Olivia looked at him. Really looked at him. At the man who had been carrying the weight of a dead empire on his back since he was 19 years old. At the man who had been forged by a mother who saw him as a tool and a world that saw him as a weapon. At the man who had knelt on a rooftop and offered her a ring with shaking hands because she was the first person who had ever made him feel like something other than what he'd been built to be. "Let it come out," she said. "Let all of it come out. Because the alternative is living under her shadow forever. Being controlled forever. And I did not survive everything we've been through to spend the rest of my life being afraid of your mother." Jason stared at her. The war behind his eyes lasted 3 seconds. Then it ended. "Then we burn it down," he said. They left the estate with the files and the footage. They drove through the dark streets of Seoul with evidence that could either free them or detonate everything. And in the back seat, Olivia held the dossier on her family against her chest and made a silent promise to every person in those photographs that no one, not Madame Kong, not anyone, would ever touch them. But Madame Kong was 3 moves ahead. She always was. When they arrived at the penthouse, the lights were already on. The door was open. And sitting in the living room, in the exact chair where Olivia usually sat to read in the evenings, was Madame Kong herself. She was smaller than Olivia had imagined. Elegant in a way that transcended fashion or beauty. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back from a face that had once been beautiful and was now something more, something carved by time and power into a mask of absolute authority. She wore a deep burgundy hanbok, traditional and immaculate, and she held a cup of tea in hands that did not tremble. Beside her stood a man Olivia did not recognize. Tall. Sharp suit. The posture of someone who had been military before becoming something else. Madame Kang's personal security chief. Behind him, 2 more men flanked the entrance to the hallway. "Sit down," Madame Kang said. Not to Jason. To Olivia. Olivia did not sit. She stood in the center of the room, the folder pressed against her side, and met the older woman's gaze with the same unflinching calm she had used against prosecutors, criminals, and every person who had ever tried to make her feel small. Jason stepped forward. "Mother. I am not here to speak with you, Jason. I am here to speak with her." Madame Kang's eyes had not left Olivia. They were dark, intelligent, and devoid of warmth. "You broke into my home tonight. You threatened my family," Olivia replied. A flicker of something crossed Madame Kang's face. Surprise. Not at the accusation. At the tone. At the absolute refusal to bend. She had expected many things from Olivia Carter. Submission was clearly among them. "I gathered information," Madame Kang said. "That is what I do. I learn everything about the people who enter my son's life. Especially the ones who intend to stay. You compiled surveillance on my 4-year-old nephew. You photographed my mother walking to her car. That's not information gathering. That's intimidation. And it stops now." Madame Kang set her tea down with a click that echoed through the room. "You are very brave, Miss Carter. Or very foolish. I haven't decided which. I'm neither. I'm tired. I'm tired of games and leverage and power plays. I'm tired of watching the man I love carry the weight of a legacy that was designed to crush him. And I'm tired of pretending that you are anything other than what you are. And what am I? A woman who is so terrified of losing control that she would rather destroy her own son than let him be happy." The silence that followed was absolute. Jason stood frozen. Take, who had positioned himself near the door, had his hand inside his jacket. Madame Kang's security chief shifted almost imperceptibly. And Madame Kang's mask cracked. It was small. A tremor at the corner of her mouth. A flicker in her eyes that could have been rage or grief or both. It lasted less than a second. Then the mask was back, harder than before. You know nothing about what I've sacrificed for my son, she said, and for the first time, her voice held something other than calculation. It held heat. You know nothing about what it cost to rebuild an empire after my husband was murdered in front of me. You know nothing about raising a boy in a world where weakness means death and teaching him to survive when every fiber of your being wants to teach him to be gentle instead. She stood. She was smaller than Olivia by several inches, but the force of her presence was enormous. I made him hard because the world was harder. I made him cold because warmth is a vulnerability that gets people killed. And yes, I manipulated. I controlled. I engineered. Because every time I loosened my grip, someone tried to take him from me. Rivals. Traitors. Police. Her eyes drilled into Olivia. You. I didn't take him from you, Olivia said. He chose to leave. Because of you. Because he was suffocating. And he finally found someone who told him he didn't have to be. Madame Kang stepped closer. They were face to face now, two women separated by decades and continents and everything in between, and the air between them crackled. Do you think love is enough? Madame Kang asked. Do you think love will protect him when the next rival comes? When the prosecutors circle? When the families he has alienated decide to make an example? Love is a luxury, Ms. Carter. Power is a necessity. Love is the only reason your son is still alive, Olivia said. Not power. Not strategy. Love. Mine. His. The kind you tried to beat out of him and couldn't, because it's the one part of him you didn't build. Something shattered behind Madame Kang's eyes. Something old and deep and carefully buried for decades. Olivia saw it happen. She saw the moment the older woman's armor developed a fault line that no amount of control could repair. Jason stepped forward. Mother. It's over. The video of David you, both angles. The memo in your handwriting. The dossier on Olivia's family. We have all of it. And we will take it to every authority that matters unless you stop. You would expose your own mother? You would imprison your own son? The question landed like a slap. Madame Kang looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time since Olivia had met this woman, for the first time since this story began, the mask fell completely. Beneath it was a face ravaged by fear. Not the manufactured concern of a strategist or the cold calculation of a puppet master. Real fear. The terror of a mother who had spent 30 years trying to protect her child in the only way she knew how and was now watching him walk away from everything she had built to keep him safe. Your father was the love of my life, she whispered. And they killed him because he trusted the wrong person. Because he was kind. Because he believed in people. I swore on his grave that I would never let that happen to you. I swore I would make you untouchable. Unreachable. Unbreakable. Her voice cracked. And you're standing in front of me telling me that the thing I built to protect you is the thing that's destroying you. Yes, Jason said. That's exactly what I'm telling you. I don't know how to let go. I know. But you have to. Because if you don't, you will lose me. Not to a rival. Not to the police. To this. To the distance you've created. I am asking you, as your son, to let go. Madame Kang's hand trembled. She reached out, almost unconsciously, and touched Jason's face. He flinched. Then he didn't. He let her hand rest against his cheek, and he saw his mother, not the strategist, not the puppet master, but the woman who had held him when he was small and told him stories about his father in a voice that shook with grief. She makes you happy, Madame Kang said. Not a question. She makes me alive. Madame Kang's gaze moved to Olivia. The hostility was not gone. It might never be completely gone. But something else was there now. A grudging, painful recognition. The acknowledgement that this woman, this outsider, this person who had entered her son's world as a weapon and become something else entirely, had reached the part of Jason that Madame Kong had spent decades trying to protect by making it unreachable. And Olivia had reached it anyway. I will withdraw the prosecutor's investigation, Madame Kong said quietly. I will release the full David Yu footage to clear the record. And I will destroy the dossier on your family. She paused. But I have conditions. Of course she did. Olivia almost smiled. The wedding will include a traditional Korean ceremony alongside whatever Western customs you prefer. My son will not erase his heritage to accommodate his love. Olivia looked at Jae-sun. He looked at her. Something passed between them that didn't need words. Agreed, Olivia said. I never wanted him to erase anything. I wanted him to choose freely. There's a difference. Madame Kong studied her for a long, measuring moment. You really aren't afraid of me. I really am not. You should be. I've heard that before. From your son. On the night I told him his lighting was wrong. Something extraordinary happened then. Madame Kong laughed. It was small, reluctant, pulled from her against her will, but it was real. And in that moment, Olivia understood something fundamental about this woman. She was not evil. She was wounded. She was a mother who had lost her husband to violence and had spent every moment since building walls so high around her son that he had nearly suffocated behind them. The tragedy was not that she didn't love Jae-sun. The tragedy was that she loved him so fiercely and so fearfully that her love had become indistinguishable from control. It would take years to untangle that. Maybe a lifetime. But the first thread had been pulled, and the wall had developed a crack that sunlight could enter through. Madame Kong left the penthouse that night with her security detail. At the door, she paused and looked back at Olivia. Take care of my son, Ms. Carter. Olivia, she said. My name is Olivia. Another pause. Then, Olivia. She left. The door closed. Jae-sun collapsed onto the couch like a man whose bones had temporarily stopped working. Olivia sat beside him and pulled his head onto her lap, running her fingers through his hair. That was the hardest thing I've ever done, he said. Harder than getting shot on a rooftop? Infinitely. Getting shot was simple. Standing in front of my mother and choosing you over everything she built? That required becoming someone I wasn't sure I knew how to be. You were extraordinary. I was terrified. Those aren't mutually exclusive. He looked up at her from her lap, and his eyes held something she had never seen there before. Peace. Not happiness. Not relief. Peace. The bone-deep quiet of a man who had finally set down a weight he had been carrying his entire life. Marry me tomorrow, he said. We have a venue booked for next month. I don't care about the venue. I care about you. Marry me tomorrow. On the rooftop. Just us and Take and a judge and the sky. Your mother will be furious. She just negotiated a traditional ceremony. My mother will adapt. She always does. And we'll have the traditional ceremony too. Later. For her. But tomorrow is for us. Olivia looked at this man. This impossible, infuriating, devastating man who had pointed a gun at her in the rain and trembled. Who had known she was a spy and loved her anyway. Who had played piano with shaking hands and fed her fake documents and stood on rooftops declaring his love to men who wanted to kill her. Tomorrow, she said. Now I know you've been riding this emotional roller coaster with me. If this story has you in your feelings, smash that like button right now. Drop a heart in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you even doing? Hit that button because we are heading into the finale and you need to see how this ends. They were married the next afternoon on the rooftop of the Kong Gallery, the same rooftop where rain and guns and betrayal had nearly ended everything. Jae-sun had the space transformed overnight. White flowers cascading from every surface. A simple arch draped in sheer fabric that caught the wind. The city spread below them like a witness. Olivia wore a dress she had bought from a Korean designer in Itaewon who had stayed up all night doing alterations. It was ivory silk with gold thread woven through the bodice, a fusion of traditions that belonged entirely to her. Her locks were crowned with small white flowers that Jae-sun had selected himself, one for each week they had known each other. Jae-sun wore a black suit with a single white flower in his lapel. His hands shook when he saw her walk toward him. They had not stopped shaking since he woke up that morning. Yoon-taek stood as witness. He wore a suit for the first time in anyone's memory and looked deeply uncomfortable about it, which made Olivia laugh and broke the tension in exactly the way everyone needed. The judge, a woman named Lee Soo-jin who owed no favors to anyone and had been chosen specifically for that reason, performed the ceremony in both Korean and English. When it came time for the vows, Jae-sun spoke first. "I have spent my life building walls," he said, his voice steady even as his hands trembled in hers. "Higher and thicker and stronger, because I was taught that the world would destroy anything I left unprotected. And then you walked into my gallery and told me my lighting was wrong, and every wall I had ever built became meaningless. Because you didn't climb over them. You didn't break through them. You just stood there, on the other side, and made me want to tear them down myself." He paused. Swallowed. "You are the bravest person I have ever known. You are the most stubborn, the most brilliant, the most impossibly beautiful person I have ever known. You dislocated your own thumb to escape a locked room. You stood in front of my mother and didn't blink. You looked at a man the entire world was afraid of and saw someone worth loving." His voice broke. "I don't deserve you. I know that. I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you. And I will fail. And I will try again. Every single day." Olivia was crying. She didn't bother wiping her tears. She let them fall. "My turn," she said. Her voice was thick but strong. "I came to Seoul to take you down. That was the job. Get close. Get evidence. Bring down the most dangerous man in Korea. And for about 2 weeks, I was really good at it." Jae-sun laughed through his own tears. "But then you showed me a painting and told me about an artist nobody had heard of, and your voice changed when you talked about beauty. It got softer. Younger. Like a boy who still believed the world could hold something good. And I thought, this man is not what they told me he was. This man is something they don't have a file for." She squeezed his hands. "You played piano for me and your heartbeat was so fast I could feel it through my whole body. You cooked for me and burned everything and pretended it was intentional. You held me in your sleep like you were afraid I would vanish. And somewhere between the lies we told each other and the truths we couldn't hide, I fell in love with you. Completely. Irreversibly. Against every rule and every instinct and every rational thought I have ever had." She took a breath. "I don't need you to deserve me, Jae-sun. I need you to be honest with me. I need you to let me see the parts of you that scare you. I need you to keep choosing me, not because it's easy, but because we both know it's right. And I need you to never, ever fix the lighting without consulting me first." Even the judge laughed. "I love you," Olivia said. "The real you. All of you. The darkness and the light and everything in between. And I will stand beside you for the rest of our lives, not behind you, not in front of you, beside you, because that's where I belong." The judge pronounced them married. Jae-sun kissed her with his hands on her face and tears on his cheeks and the entire city of Seoul glittering beneath them like 10 million candles lit for two people who had survived the impossible. Taek clapped once, stiffly, and then couldn't help himself and clapped again. The flowers swayed in the wind. The sky was clear for the first time in weeks. And on a bench at the edge of the rooftop, unnoticed until that moment, sat Madame Kang. She had arrived silently, alone, without her security detail. She wore a simple gray dress instead of her usual armor of tradition and authority. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and watched her son marry a woman she had tried to destroy, and her face held an expression so complex that it would take years to fully understand. When Jae-sun saw her, he went still. Olivia followed his gaze. Mother and son looked at each other across the rooftop. The distance between them was more than physical. It was decades of control and obedience and a love so tangled with fear that neither of them knew where one ended and the other began. Madame Kong stood. She walked forward. She stopped in front of Olivia. The two women faced each other. The mother who had tried to destroy her. The wife who had refused to be destroyed. Madame Kong reached into her bag and produced a small wooden box, old and worn. She opened it. Inside was a ring. Simple gold band, thin as a whisper, with a single inscription in Korean on the inside. "This was my husband's ring," Madame Kong said. "He wore it every day of our marriage. He was wearing it the night he died. I took it off his hand myself." She closed the box and held it out to Olivia. "It belongs to the person who holds my son's heart. That is no longer me." Olivia took the box. Her hands were steady but her eyes were full. "It will always be you two," Olivia said. "Being his wife doesn't mean replacing his mother. It means he has two people who love him now instead of one." Something in Madame Kang's expression shifted. The fault line widened. And through it, something fragile and tentative and almost hopeful emerged. She turned to Jae-sun. "Your father would have hated your vows. Too emotional. Not enough poetry." Jae-sun stared at her. Then he laughed. A real, broken, beautiful laugh that released something he had been holding inside for longer than he could remember. He stepped forward and, for the first time in years, he hugged his mother. She was stiff at first. Uncertain. Then her arms came up and wrapped around her son, and she held him the way she had when he was small, fierce and total, and the tears she shed were the first honest tears she had allowed herself in decades. Olivia watched them. Take watched them. The judge quietly gathered her things and slipped away, sensing that this moment was too sacred for strangers. When Jae-sun and his mother finally separated, Madame Kong looked at Olivia one more time. "You were right," she said. "I was afraid. I had been afraid since the night my husband died. And I turned that fear into something monstrous." "It wasn't monstrous," Olivia said. "It was human. And humans can change. Can they? I'm looking at the evidence right now." Madame Kong held her gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, with the gravity of someone signing a treaty after a long war. She left the rooftop. But the box with the ring stayed. And the crack in the wall between them stayed open, wide enough now for something new to grow through. That night, alone in the penthouse that was now theirs together, Jae-sun carried Olivia across the threshold because she told him it was a Western tradition and he told her it was ridiculous and she told him to do it anyway. He kicked the door closed behind them and carried her to the bedroom without setting her down, kissing her the entire way, bumping into a wall, nearly tripping over Take's shoes that he had left by the door because Take had apparently been living in the guest room for weeks and neither of them had noticed. They laughed until they couldn't breathe. And then the laughter became something else. Something slower. Deeper. The urgency of their earlier encounters had been replaced by something new. Not less intense. More intentional. The desperate hunger of two people afraid of losing each other had become the deliberate tenderness of two people who knew they had time. He undressed her slowly, reverently, pressing his lips against each inch of skin he revealed. She traced the scar on his shoulder from Miho's bullet, the thin line on his ribs from a fight she hadn't heard about, the tattoo on his back that she had never asked about because she knew he would tell her when he was ready. "My father's name," he said, feeling her fingers trace the characters. "I got it the day he died. I was 19. The tattoo artist's hands were shaking because I was crying and holding a gun and neither of those things is ideal when someone is trying to work." She kissed the tattoo. He turned and pulled her against him. They made love with the lights on because neither of them wanted to hide anymore. No shadows. No pretenses. No lies between their bodies or their hearts. She whispered his name and he whispered hers and the city outside the windows held its breath. Afterward, tangled in sheets that cost more than her first car, she lay with her head on his chest and listened to his heartbeat slow from thunder to rain to the quiet, steady rhythm of a man at peace. "I need to tell you something," she said. "More secrets?" He said it lightly, but she felt his body tense beneath her. "Not a secret. A discovery." She lifted her head and looked at him. "I'm pregnant." The world stopped. Jason's face went through a sequence of expressions so rapid they were almost comical. Shock. Disbelief. Terror. And then, rising through all of it like the sun breaking through storm clouds, joy. Pure, uncontained, devastating joy. Say that again, he whispered. I'm pregnant. About 6 weeks. I found out yesterday morning, but everything with your mother happened and He kissed her. Hard. Deep. With both hands on her face and tears streaming down his cheeks. A baby, he said against her lips. Our baby. Our baby. He pulled back and looked at her with an expression of such fierce, tender, overwhelming love that she felt it rewrite something fundamental inside her. This man, who had been taught that wanting makes you weak, who had been built into a weapon by a mother who loved him like a general loves a soldier, was looking at her with the raw, defenseless wonder of a man who had just been given something he never believed he was allowed to want. I'm going to be terrible at this, he said. You're going to be wonderful at this. I don't know how to be a father. The only model I had died when I was a teenager. Then we figure it out together. Like we've figured out everything else. Badly at first, then better, then perfectly imperfect. Exactly. He placed his hand on her stomach. It was flat, unchanged, giving no sign of the universe being built inside. But he held his hand there like he could feel it already, like the future was pressing back against his palm. I am going to protect you, he said. Both of you. With everything I have and everything I am. I know. But Jason? Yes? Our child is not going to be raised the way you were. No walls. No weapons. No empire pressing down on their shoulders before they're old enough to stand. No, he agreed. Our child will be raised to choose. To love. To tell people their lighting is wrong without being afraid. She laughed through tears. He held her close. Outside, the city of Seoul sparkled and hummed, alive with 10 million stories, none of them as improbable, as devastating, as achingly beautiful as the one unfolding 30 stories above. The days that followed were the quietest they had ever known. Not empty quiet. Full quiet. The quiet of a life being built. Olivia ran her gallery. Jae-sun completed the transition of the Kong organization's operations into legitimate business, retaining the real estate, the art galleries, and the import businesses while dismantling the rest with Taek's methodical assistance. He met with prosecutors voluntarily, provided evidence against Miho and Dongwook that sealed their convictions, and cooperated with investigators in a way that shocked everyone who had ever known the name Kong. Madame Kong kept her word. The prosecutors' investigations were withdrawn. The David Yu footage, both angles, was submitted to the police, and the case was officially closed as self-defense. The dossier on Olivia's family was destroyed in Olivia's presence, each page fed into a shredder while Madame Kong watched with an expression that might have been shame. The relationship between Madame Kong and Olivia was not easy. It would never be easy. They were two women of extraordinary will and opposite backgrounds, bound together by their love for the same man. But slowly, incrementally, something began to form between them. Not warmth. Not friendship. Respect. The grudging, hard-won respect of two warriors who recognized each other's strength. Madame Kong began visiting the gallery. She never announced herself. She would simply appear, examine the art, and occasionally make a comment that was either a compliment or a critique depending on how generous Olivia was feeling that day. One afternoon, she paused in front of a painting by a young Korean-Nigerian artist that depicted a woman standing at a crossroads, one path leading to a traditional Korean gate, the other to a door marked with Adinkra symbols. This is new, Madame Kong said. She's 23. Based in Busan. She paints about identity and belonging and the spaces in between. Madame Kong studied the painting for a long time. I spent my life believing there was only one path. That loyalty to tradition and family required the elimination of everything foreign. Everything unfamiliar. She paused. I was wrong. It was the closest she had ever come to an apology. Olivia heard what was beneath the words and accepted it for what it was. Would you like to meet her? Olivia asked. The artist? She's having a showing here next month. Madame Kong looked at her. I would. They stood together in the gallery, the older woman and the younger, separated by decades and united by the man they both loved and the child that was coming, and the silence between them was no longer hostile. It was thoughtful. Careful. Alive with the possibility that something new could grow in the space where something old had finally been set down. 6 months later, on a spring morning when the cherry blossoms were painting Seoul in clouds of pink and white, Kang Minjun was born. He had his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn chin and a cry that could be heard 3 floors down in the hospital. Jae-sun held his son for the first time and wept. Openly. Completely. Without shame or restraint. The most feared man in South Korea stood in a hospital room in a wrinkled shirt with dark circles under his eyes and tears streaming down his face, holding a 7-pound baby like he was made of glass and gold and starlight. Olivia watched him from the bed, exhausted and radiant, and knew with absolute certainty that every impossible, painful, beautiful thing that had led them to this moment had been worth it. Madame Kong arrived an hour later. She held her grandson with the practiced ease of a woman who had done this before and the trembling wonder of one who had never expected to do it again. She looked at the baby's face, so like her son's, so like her husband's, and the tears that fell were old tears. Decades of grief and loss and hardened love melting in the warmth of a new beginning. He has his grandfather's eyes, she said. He has his grandmother's stubbornness, Jae-sun replied. Madame Kong looked at him. The corner of her mouth twitched. Then he will survive anything. Yoontaek arrived shortly after with a stuffed tiger that was nearly as large as the baby. He placed it in the corner of the room, nodded at the infant with the gravity of a man inspecting a new recruit, and said, "He'll do." Olivia laughed so hard she pulled a stitch. Captain Harris sent flowers and a card that read, "Congratulations. He's already under surveillance." Just kidding. Mostly. Yuna sent a hand-painted card with a note that read, "He's beautiful. I hate that I mean it. Take care of each other." And Olivia's mother, Gloria Carter, who had arrived from Atlanta 2 weeks before the birth and had not stopped cooking since, declared that the baby needed a middle name from her side of the family and spent 3 days debating options with Madame Kong in a mixture of English, broken Korean, and hand gestures that somehow resulted in both women crying over shared photographs of their late husbands at 3 in the morning. Gloria and Madame Kong should not have gotten along. They were from different worlds, different cultures, different generations of pain. But they shared the one thing that transcended all of it. They were mothers. They had loved fiercely and imperfectly. They had sacrificed and suffered and survived. And they both recognized in the other a reflection of themselves. "Your mother-in-law is terrifying," Gloria told Olivia during a quiet moment. "I know, Mama. I like her. I know that too." Kang Minjun grew. He learned to crawl in the gallery between paintings worth millions. He learned to walk by holding onto his father's fingers while Jae-sun walked backward through the penthouse with the focused concentration of a man performing the most important task of his life. He learned his first word, which was no, and used it with a frequency and conviction that made Madame Kong declare him a natural leader. And on the first anniversary of their wedding, Jae-sun took Olivia back to the rooftop where everything had happened. The rain. The guns. The vows. The beginning and the end and the beginning again. The rooftop was quiet now. The string lights still hung. The flowers had been replaced with new ones. The city sparkled below, unchanged and eternal. 1 year, Olivia said, leaning against the railing. 1 year. He stood beside her, close enough that their arms touched, the way they had on the balcony the night of their first kiss. "You know, I stood on this rooftop once with a gun pointed at you. I remember. My hand was shaking. I noticed. I couldn't have pulled the trigger. Not in 1,000 lifetimes. Even when I thought the world was watching. Even when Miho was smiling. Even when everything I had built demanded it." He turned to face her. "You were the first thing in my life that was more important than my survival." She took his hand. "And you were the first person who made me realize that survival isn't enough. That there has to be something worth surviving for." He pulled her close. They stood together on the rooftop, the detective and the Mafia boss, the woman who had come to destroy him and the man who had let her in knowing the cost, two people who had no business loving each other and had done it anyway, fiercely and imperfectly and with everything they had. Below them, the city hummed. Above them, the sky held its breath. And between them, in the space where lies had once lived, there was nothing left but truth. She pressed her forehead against his. Jason? Yes? The lighting on the rooftop is perfect. He laughed. The sound rose into the night, carrying with it the weight of everything they had survived and the lightness of everything they had become. And it echoed across the soul skyline like a promise kept, a war ended, a love that had burned through every wall ever built against it and emerged, not unscathed, but unbroken. Always unbroken. If this story made you laugh, cry, hold your breath, or fall in love, then you know exactly what to do right now. Smash that like button until your screen cracks. Hit subscribe and turn on that notification bell because this channel brings you stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Drop a comment right now and tell me, what was your favorite moment? Was it the rooftop standoff? The piano scene? Olivia escaping with a dislocated thumb? The moment Madame Kong gave Olivia her husband's ring? Tell me everything. And share this video with someone who loves a good love story, someone who needs to know that sometimes the most impossible love is the most real. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. Thank you for riding this journey with Olivia and Jason. Stay blessed, stay beautiful, and I will see you in the next one.